G'day mate, 40 here. So one thing that consistently surprises me in the Mark Halperin show on politics is how many participants they get talk about how they were once Republicans but now they're voting Democrat, and usually it's because of Donald Trump and how he's taken over the Republican Party. And I can get why someone would be so concerned by the things that Donald Trump says, that even though they were naturally a Republican and conservative, they just can't handle his over-the-top behavior, the terrible way that he handled the 2020 election, the role that he played in the January 6th uprising. I get that. But then what's more difficult to understand is how they then vote for Democratic candidates down the ballot. So how does one identify as a conservative and vote for the Democratic Party? Right? That seems bewildering to me. So one argument it is that they're for a more interventionist American foreign policy. And so they want to stand up to Putin, and they want to bomb Iran, and they want the United States taking a more active role as the world's policeman. But it's hard to believe that would account for a significant number of voters. All right? Very few American voters cast their ballot based on foreign policy. So that doesn't ring true. But I understand someone is disturbed by Trump's rhetoric, and then they see Trump taking over the Republican Party, and so they identify as conservative, and now they vote for the Democratic Party, the party of same-sex marriage and no moral qualms about abortion, and support for children who mutilate their bodies to have what's called gender-affirming care, where they have their penises and breasts removed while as children. Like, how on earth do you support that as a conservative? But as the two major American political parties realign, and the Republicans become the party of the lowbrow and the working class, you see these country club Republicans feeling more at home now in the Democratic Party, particularly ostensibly conservative columnists at the New York Times, such as David Brooks and company. So country club Republicans, I see, switching to Democrats, while Black and Latino voters and the white working class are increasingly identifying with the Republicans. The Republicans are becoming the lowbrow party. Notice a common line of attack on Donald Trump is that he is using racism to appeal to the electorate to get elected. And this just seems to have the feeling of throwing anything against the wall. So one message is that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and then you've got the opposite message that he's giving people what they want. He's telling the people what they want to hear. He's giving people racist messages that appeal to their prejudices and their worst instincts. But if Donald Trump is indeed telling people what they want to hear, then surely that's in line with democracy. I don't see how you can have it both ways. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, and he appeals to a large number of voters by telling them what they want to hear. So it's this contradictory message. You've got Joe Biden calling Trump supporters garbage. And it's funny how the media plays that as opposed to the remark of the insult comic Tony Hinchcliffe on Sunday. So Tony Hinchcliffe's comments about Puerto Rico being an island of garbage was seized on as evidence of massive racism on the part of a speaker at Trump's rally. And he wasn't a speaker, he was an insult comic. Right? Everyone operates within a particular genre. Everyone has their own narrative. And identical words and behaviors will be interpreted completely differently if different people have different narratives. So it's funny seeing Joe Biden call out Republicans as and Trump supporters as garbage. You notice this with older people, they have much less of a filter. And one useful way of understanding that is Trump supporters he sees as garbage, but not necessarily Trump voters. Right? A lot of Trump voters don't like Donald Trump, but they like his policies. Walking around here in Westwood, beside the Veteran Affairs Department, right next to UCLA. So, as long as opponents of Donald Trump and Democratic professionals and media professionals deride Trump supporters based on demagoguery and salesmanship, right, they are living in a world of delusion, because as Dan Turrentine, the Democratic political operative on Mark Halperin's morning show, points out, Trump support is 100% based on substance. Donald Trump came along in 2015, 2016, says the United States is unnecessarily in all these forever wars. That's not in America's interests. And that was completely against what the elite were talking about. Right? There was no other politician making this argument. And Donald Trump swept to the Republican primary victory and then the general election victory by making the point that America doesn't need to be in forever wars. Even though there was no part of the elite who were pushing the same message. Donald Trump also made an unpopular case among elites for fairer trading deals, for use of tariffs to give American workers a better deal. And there was almost no support among elite economists, among media elites, business elites, political elites for Donald Trump's trade policies, yet they resonated with the American people. So Donald Trump renegotiated NAFTA, and there was a Democratic congresswoman in Michigan who said that she's hearing from union members in Michigan that Donald Trump is more attuned to their needs and interests, that Donald Trump went to bat for renegotiating NAFTA, not something that any of the Democrats were calling for. So the union elite is overwhelmingly behind Kamala Harris, but the union rank and file is usually much more on the side of Donald Trump. It's similar to that adage about the 2016 election. It's a battle between the news story and the comment section. The news stories are universally bad for Donald Trump, but the comment section is filled with pro-Trump voices. The media elite, academic elite, business elite, entertainment elite, political elite, right? Usually on the side of the Democrats. But Donald Trump appeals to the working class, to regular Americans. And he has succeeded in remaking the Republican Party. And it's hard to imagine, even if Donald Trump loses this election, that the Republican Party will shift from being the worker party, the more skeptical of foreign intervention party. It's hard to see how the Republican Party will shift even after Donald Trump leaves the scene, away from the fundamentals that he has remade the party in the last 9 years. J.D. Vance would likely be a much more effective messenger and executor of Donald Trump's platform, but he does not have the charisma level of Donald Trump. It's impossible to think of any other Republican politician who can match Donald Trump for his celebrity status and his charisma. It's just a shame that Trump is not particularly good at running things. He's not a particularly great businessman. He hasn't shown sterling qualities as a CEO. Now, if Trump loses the election, how will Republicans react? I think overwhelmingly Republicans will just get on with their lives. So there's a lot of media hype about the amount of violence likely to come from Trump supporters if he loses the election. But we see on the streets and in our life experience, the violence much more likely comes from Biden supporters, from Kamala Harris supporters, from those constituencies that overwhelmingly vote for the Democrats. So I don't believe that Trump supporters are going to be the major cause of violence, right? Black Lives Matter unleashed over 100,000 unnecessary deaths when you see the rise in traffic fatalities associated with the George Floyd death and the Black Lives Matter uprising that followed George Floyd's death. When we see the massive spike in crime rates, murder rates, and traffic fatalities and pedestrian fatalities after Black Lives Matter emerged in 2014 and 2020. So we're talking over 100,000 unnecessary deaths caused by this left-wing Black Lives Matter movement. The dwarfs the amount of violence committed by people on the right. And yet the media focus is entirely on how will Trump supporters react if Donald Trump loses this election. So there will be some awkwardness, right? Some Trump supporters will behave badly. But overwhelmingly, for people on the right, their lives do not revolve around politics, right? Their lives revolve around their family, their religion, their work, their friends, their community, their hobbies. Right? It's having a life revolving around politics is much more a thing on the left. And so being on the left politically predisposes you to depression and anxiety because you're much more focused on all sorts of outcomes that are outside of your control, such as institutional racism. And there's nothing that you as an individual can do to substantially change the amount of institutional racism in a society. And so being on the left predisposes people to higher rates of depression, anxiety, and mental illness because you're placing so much of your own well-being in the hands of social outcomes. Well, if you're a traditional person, if you're a religious person, right, you recognize that you're not responsible for society. You're responsible for your own choices, that you have a role to play in your family, your extended family, your community, and your friends. And that's where your focus rightly lies, right? The more focused you are on outcomes outside of your control, the more unhappy you're going to be. And so if Donald Trump wins, there's going to be just this massive mental health crisis on the left. How does this man come back? We thought we killed him. Interesting article in the New York Times on Mark Elias, who seems to be the #1 Democratic election lawyer. And he's been busy trying to shift election laws in favor of Democrats, and is often highly successful. But in all his success, he's opened up all sorts of pathways for Republicans to more effectively fight back. And so this is what Tom Sowell referred to as stage 1 thinking. You think that you just do an action and that's it. But for every action, there's a reaction. Hamas attacked Israel on October 7. killed about 1,200 Israelis, took about 250 hostage. But then that sparked a massive reaction by Israel that blew up Gaza, that has largely destroyed Hamas, largely destroyed other Iranian proxies such as Hezbollah, made Iran more vulnerable than it's been in decades. Palestinians have a terrible reputation among their fellow Sunni Arabs. Right? Egypt does not want any Palestinians in Egypt. Why? Because pretty much everywhere that the Palestinians have moved in mass, they've caused violent dislocations. Palestinians moved into Lebanon and assisted in the slaughter of thousands of Lebanese Christians. So it's telling that when Lebanon was a majority Christian country, it was an oasis, it was a Mecca, it was a high-functioning, prosperous society. But when Muslim immigrants and Muslim slaughters of Christians reduced Christian influence, and Lebanon turned into a majority Muslim country, descended into hell. Right? And that says something about the state of Christianity and Islam right now. I don't think that the state of being a Christian is an immutable status. I don't think the being a Muslim is an immutable status. I don't think there's anything inherent in Christianity or Islam that makes one or the other more likely to create prosperity. But at this particular time and place, you look at Lebanon and you see it was a prosperous, high-functioning society when it was a Christian-dominated society, and it descended into hell, and it became a dominantly Muslim society. So I'd like to know, what is the overall track record when majority Christian societies or communities turn into majority Muslim societies? Can you name me any societies that became more prosperous and free when they became more Islamic? Because I can't think of any. Has the United Kingdom become more prosperous and free thanks to massive number of Muslims who've moved there? Has France become more prosperous, free, more cohesive and united? Has Germany become more prosperous, free, more cohesive and united thanks to its massive importation of Middle Eastern Muslims? Has Holland become more prosperous, free and more cohesive as a society since it massively imported Muslims? Now, I'll apply the same framework to my group. I'm a convert to Judaism. And I notice that whenever Jews become higher than 5% in a given society, that there tends to be a lot of internal disruption over that. Because when you cross that 5% mark, you have the numbers to form a society within a society. That does not necessarily improve social cohesion. When you've got a nation within a nation, it tends to always lead to a massive boost in anti-Jewish attitudes and riots and discrimination. So, certainly, please God, not arguing there's anything inherently bad about being Christian, Jewish, Muslim, but simply noticing at this particular point in time, communities that move from majority Christian to majority Muslim, at the times and places that I'm thinking of, they tend to become less cohesive, less prosperous, less free, and the quality of life dramatically declines. And Lebanon is the number one example. You had a lot of Palestinians move into Jordan and just created massive upheaval that led to widespread massacres. Nationalism has been the number one political force in the world over the past 200 years. But nationalism is not so much a thing among Arabs, right? For them, it's more tribalism. And so the nation state of Egypt or of Jordan or Saudi Arabia doesn't seem to hold much significance, doesn't seem to hold much loyalty for Sunni Arabs. And so the dominant conception is that Palestinians need their own state. But where do we see among Sunni Arabs, among Arabs in general, that a nation state is what commands their loyalty? I don't see that. I don't see Arabs demonstrating passionate attachment to a nation state. Right? Their loyalty seems to be more at a tribal level. Right? That can be understood also in Islamic terms. But I think tribal is the more accurate conception. All right, let's go to the chat. I'm as tolerant as a Republican. I've never called a Harris vote a garbage. Soon as Trump passes away, the GOP will turn centrist. Well, Donald Trump is seen as much more centrist than Kamala Harris, and that's often a good benchmark for who's going to win an election. So usually the more centrist candidate is the candidate seen as more centrist is the one more likely to win. It's amusing to see Kamala Harris running for president completely differently in 2024 than she ran in 2019. So her campaign is ostensibly centrist, even though when you get a crack in her facade, you see that what truly excites her are the radical positions that she campaigned on in 2019. So if Kamala Harris loses, will the Democrats move more towards the center? I understand Donald Trump's policies as being pretty centrist. Concern about workers, concern about redrawing trade agreements to favor American workers, stopping illegal immigration so that American workers can enjoy a higher income, more safety, avoiding forever wars. Right, these all seem fairly centrist to me. And when you have surveys of who's more radical, who's more extreme on a left-right divide, general consensus is that Trump appears much more towards the middle than Kamala Harris. So James Blair was on Sean Spicer's show yesterday, and he still sounds optimistic about a Trump victory. Democrats are drawing hope from high female turnout in early voting. So if Kamala Harris wins, it will be because of a high female turnout. So when you look at final voting numbers, the American electorate tends to be about 53% female to 47% male. Right? Women are more likely to turn out to vote than men. And yet many polls are based on a 50-50 male-female divide. So that's one way that Kamala Harris's vote may be understated in the public polls. I see Palestinians asking for a right of return, and there is no right of return. right? There's no international law about anyone having a right of return. And you may well have grown up in a neighborhood that's been taken over by groups that are hostile to you and to your group. Do you have a right of return? No. Right? Neighborhoods tip, neighborhoods change. And the groups that have lived in a particular neighborhood for dozens or even hundreds of years, they no longer will feel safe moving back there. And so it's wish fulfillment for Palestinians to campaign on a right of return. Right? There's no right of return. Not in empirical reality, not in international law, not in human rights law. There's no right of return. I don't like the framework of Israel has a right to exist or Palestinians have a right to return. You essentially get the nation state that you can defend, that you can seize and you can defend. Right, relying on abstract rights to protect your people, it's not a winning formula. Right, reality is decided by those who are more competent. Just read an interesting Substack essay by Catherine Shannon about why women loved the fictional character Tony Soprano on the TV show The Sopranos. And one reason they loved him was that he was so competent. He could get things done. He could fix things. He could protect his woman. He demonstrated that he genuinely liked women. But it was his competence and his desire to protect. So these are traits that women value in men. And men often want to dismiss female desires. Oh, she just wants money. She just wants a guy who's going to pay for everything. But I think perhaps the most basic female desire is for a competent man who will provide and protect and not just look for Mr. Moneybags. And if your woman is being harassed by some sales dude or by the plumber or by a neighbor, right? She doesn't want to have to bother with these things. She wants a man who will, blaze a trail for her through life and protect her, and she doesn't want to be constantly thinking about her safety. And I think Israelis want a prime minister who will do the same thing. It's astonishing how Bibi Netanyahu has been increasingly vindicated by Israeli competence over the past few months. That Israelis just want to feel safe. And as opposed to all the opposition who didn't want to invade Gaza, didn't want to invade Rafah, didn't want to take on Hezbollah, did not want to take on Iran directly. So far, Bibi Netanyahu has proven to be, to my surprise, the most competent of all of Israel's major politicians. And this conception that if we just gave Palestinians their own state, that we'd be able to solve the Middle East crisis just seems deluded when you consider that no Arab seems particularly dedicated to his state. Nationalism is just not a major factor among Arabs. So why would a Palestinian state be the exception compared to Arabs' lack of enthusiasm for their nation states everywhere else in the Sunni world? So many Western intellectuals look at the world as though people are basically the same, but they're not. Different people have different gifts. Different people are predisposed towards different types of political and legal arrangements. And nationalism simply doesn't hold the same force, meaning loyalty to a nation state among Arabs, as it does among many other people. So the Trump administration and the Biden administration have absolutely opposite views on how to deal with Iran. Right? The Trump administration got tough on Iran, starved them of resources, and therefore limited their ability to fund their terror proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah. And yet, in much of the media commentary, you hear how it's hard to tell, how much of a difference there will be between Trump and Biden with regard to the Middle East. Well, Trump and Biden have diametrically opposite approaches to Iran, and I'm not pronouncing on which one is superior. Right, standing here right now, looks like the Trump administration approach was superior, but I'm not going to argue for that because the world is an incredibly complicated place. But what is indisputable is that Trump and Biden have opposite agendas for Iran. Under Trump, the United States is willing to confront Iran, kill its leading terrorist Qasem Soleimani, and starve the regime of funds. While Biden and Obama, opened up funds to Iran, protected Iran from direct Iranian retaliation, and allowed Iran to become a dominant power in the Middle East, exercising occupation over Lebanon, many other parts of the Middle East. So we're waiting to see if Iran is going to sprint towards the nuclear weapon, hoping to develop it before Trump takes power. I suspect that if Trump wins the election, he'll allow Israel to do what it likes with Iran. Though I don't think Donald Trump's going to want to get American forces directly involved in a battle against Iran. Okay, that's it.